But I genuinely believe that I don't think in my heart that we're going to have President Trump. I think it's going to be President Kamala Harris, because everything seems to be going for her. And I think you'll find that she is equally, if not more, pro-Ukraine than Joe Biden was. So I think that Ukraine can breathe a big sigh of relief there. I actually phoned the US Embassy a couple of days ago because, similarly as we did just now, I thought I could actually create a slot in a forthcoming rally where it would have a US theme, and they have agreed to take a call, and I'm hoping to get some US memorabilia so we can actually have a themed slot in the forthcoming rally to show our appreciation of what the USA is doing for us. The next thing which comes to mind is, of course, today, almost as we speak, it is the start of the Olympic Games in Paris 2024. And I tried to think of some appropriate words to use today. I hope you think that these are as good as I can do. I'm saying, although today is in no way a day of victory for Ukraine, I believe that today is a day of triumph for Ukraine. I'll explain why. Because on the one hand, Ukraine is standing proudly at the Olympic Games alongside the other nations of Europe as a proud sovereign nation, and it is welcomed by those other nations. But what has happened to Russia, regardless of neutral athletes? Russia is excluded from the Olympic Games. Isn't that terrible? Russia is excluded from the Olympic Games, and they must know that they are a pariah state because they are not wanted.
Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 No terrorists at Olympics.
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 Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state. I've just seen my most favourite person in the world at this very moment, which is dear Yuri over there. Hi Yuri, I'm so glad to see you. I really am glad to see you. But before we turn from Olympic Games and athletes, let us just stop for a moment to think about the exhibition which was recently, I believe, in Parliament Square, and a very important one, which showed that 487 Ukrainian athletes have lost their lives during the terrible war brought about by the Russian aggressor. So I want to say about all 487 of them on this day of the opening, I believe that all 487 of them are worthy of gold medals. They are all heroes. So I wanted to just say that. Now, returning back to Britain again, I was very fortunate last night to go to a meeting, and I was fortunate enough to get a selfie with my local MP, and my local MP has agreed that she will soon come and speak to us, and I believe that could be the start of almost a list of British MPs that will come and speak to us at our rallies, and I think will provide both inspiration to us and will provide information of what goes on in the British government, etc., especially towards Ukraine. I'm actually deep into my own project at the moment, and I'd like to just share this with you. I'm as quickly as I can, producing a database of all 650 UK MPs, and in particular the MPs in London and the south of England. Now, I believe that with that database we can identify all the relevant MPs, and we can select to try and send the same letter to as many as possible out of those London and South MPs. Now, my idea, so that means that we can give it to people and they'll have the same letter. Never mind, it's almost the same letter, so it'll be easy. But my idea, and this hopefully will make major impact, is that not only can they email their MPs, but I am going to want people to bring hard copies of their letters to the rallies and of their friends, and we will gather all the letters together into a huge pile of them, and then we'll go down the road and we'll present this pile, hopefully perhaps 100 letters. That would be my target, 100 letters to go to UK MPs, and I think the photographs of that, etc., should make quite a good impact. So just to let you know, that's a project that I'm currently working on. Now, let me just explain to you what I think should be the key points of this letter to involve you all in the letter. I haven't drafted this letter, my good friend Thomas Brayford has done it. But point 1, Russia's war against Ukraine poses an existential threat to the whole rules-based order. The only way to stop unprecedented violence is to provide Ukraine with the most comprehensive military and training package to ensure Russian defeat once and for all. We can no longer dither in our support for Ukraine. Dithering over Ukraine is making a broader European conflict more, not less likely. Second point, and we'll have a bit of chanting again for this, the government and other governments must facilitate the provision of more air defence systems to Ukraine. Let us just hesitate on that a moment and say, air defence for Ukraine!
Air defense for Ukraine!
Air defence for Ukraine!
Air defense for Ukraine!
Air defence for Ukraine!
Air defense for Ukraine!
And a message for other governments, possibly including Britain, but certainly for other governments. Let's talk about fighter jets. Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine!
Fighter jets for Ukraine!
And in particular, F-16s for Ukraine!
F-16s for Ukraine!
F-16s for Ukraine!
F-16s for Ukraine!
Now, point 3 of a letter, and I think this is very important, as we know. What we want, what the letter says is that we want the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs to do all he can to help facilitate the release of Ukraine prisoners of war held in Russia under inhumane conditions, and help with lobbying for the return of thousands of Ukrainian children abducted by Russia. This is really one of the biggest sins of the war, as we know, the latter, the abduction of children, and as we know, the International Criminal Court did have the guts to what was it called? Well, to make Putin a criminal. I don't know if you're the same, but I have quite difficulty in actually saying his name these days. I usually refer to him as VP because I don't like to say his name. I don't think he's worthy of saying his name. Point 4. There's only 5 points, by the way, if you think I'm never going to stop. I think the letter should say there's no justice for Ukrainians without full accountability for all the crimes committed by Russia since its invasion of Ukraine, which goes back to 2014. I think the UK must work together with its allies to expedite an International Criminal Court investigation into Russian war crimes in Ukraine and to bring war criminals to justice, as it has done, as I said earlier, in part. There's also the thing about ecocide, or ecocide, I think you say. I think the letter calls that really we believe that ecocide should be recognised as a crime, and in particular I concentrate on the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine. I mean, that was big news for a little while and now it's disappeared, but I'm sure the devastation caused by that, the destruction of that dam, is still being felt as we speak. And so, as I said, I think the letter should call for ecocide to be recognised as a crime. It means he'll take over from me. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you find it to be reasonably interesting. So thank you once again. Slava Ukrainian.
Yeah, Slava!
Oh, in fact, another friend is taking over.
Yeah. Liam will take over from Garth. Thank you, 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 Garth.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I don't have anything prepared, but I thought I'd fill a little time as a speaker. Seems the easiest thing to talk about would just be my experience to start with. I lived in Ukraine. I was in Ukraine during Maidan. Didn't know too much about it at the time, but I saw how passionate people were, and I respected that they really valued freedom and a lot of the things that America is meant to stand for. Ukrainians seemed to believe it at that time more than anyone that I had known growing up in America. Not to bash America or the West, but a lot of times we are very comfortable in our lives. We have, great jobs. We have everything we need. But if you go then to a country that's not doing so well, and they're just begging to have all the benefits and the great lives that you have, it's hard to really ignore that. And I think even at that point, before the full-scale invasion, it was already kind of obvious that Ukrainians wanted and needed our help. So I spent about a year in Ukraine at that time teaching English. I can't say I really had the ways and means to help that much other than just making friends and teaching English. I ended up leaving Ukraine, moving to a few different countries, ended up in England. And when I was here was when the full-scale invasion started. And leading up to that, we all kind of knew what was going on, and I was feeling very Russophobic and proudly Russophobic as I saw what was going on, and I could understand why everyone was so upset with what Russia was doing. When the actual invasion happened, though, I was shocked and devastated. So I made sure, I assume I saw online, I don't remember at the time, that the protests were happening, so made it to my next protest here, and I've been coming regularly. It's obviously a great opportunity to show the world that people support Ukraine, because if no one comes here, then people are going to assume that no one cares. So even if it's just a few of us, it shows that there's enough mass consciousness about what's going on that at least a small percentage of us take the time to come here. And that's really important. And it's also a really easy thing to do, come here. It doesn't cost anything. You come here for half an hour, 2 hours if you can, and I think it makes you feel good that you've done something good for that day to help a country in need. So I'm really happy so many of us do that. And yeah, it's also a great time to share Ukrainian culture with each other. So really happy that these protests happen regularly. And really outside the protests, there's so many other things people can do. I myself, since the invasion, have visited Ukraine a few times to volunteer. And I didn't actually have any plan when I first went. Didn't know if it would be awkward just showing up. I mean, I already knew the language, I had friends there, so it wasn't a big deal. But what I found was the second I got there, just finding different volunteers, different projects you could work on, and people just, begging for, any attention or any help you can get. So anyone who looks for some way to help, there's ways out there. I ended up didn't end up moving to Ukraine to just help full time. I'm back in England working, but me and my friends have found different ways to help from abroad. We've got a drone group. If anyone's interested, ask me about. We raise money. Usually buy 1 or 2 Mavic drones a month, helping out different troops that we know directly. We don't have any costs on top, so everything, any extra costs we cover, and all the money goes direct to the drones. So if anyone's interested, please ask me about it. But yeah, there's millions of ways you can help. You can contact your MP. You can make a website about contacting your MP. Inform people. You can share on Instagram. You can do so many different things, and every little bit helps. And Slava Ukraini!
Slava! Thank you,
Slava
Liam.
nacii!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим героям трити!
Слава! 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 Thank you, Liam. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We're gonna have some Ukrainian music and we're gonna continue. Thank you. Слава Україні! Україна! 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 Нашим захисникам тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
We gather here 3 times a week since 2014 on a different schedule, and this is one of the longest peaceful war rallies in the history of this country. We really hoped it would be the shortest one, but it isn't. Even pro-Ukrainian Russians will tell you every single day, they will go, it's 883rd day of the war, it's 882nd day of the war. No, it's been 3,800, I think it was. Precise number is from 20th of February 2014, it's 3,809 days. Even pro-Ukrainian Russians don't consider that from 2014 until 2022, that was war. More than 14,000 of Ukrainian soldiers have died. They keep advancing, Many people, including me, I thought when Crimea was annexed, this will be over. They try to occupy fully 2 regions. People say, okay, gonna get 2 regions, they're gonna leave you alone. And now Putin is saying that he wants every single Ukrainian soldier out of, he calls it Donetsk and Lugansk republics, but I don't know why. The other 2 places, they call them regions. Although they are declared as part of Russia, they say the war will be over if all Ukrainian soldiers leave 4 Ukrainian regions. How about 5 million plus civilians there? What's gonna happen? Let's have a look what has happened in occupied regions where Russia is ruling. If you're a male, age 18 or over, you will be forced to fight Ukrainians on the front line. If you're a woman, you will be raped or you will be beaten and anything of your value will be stolen. More than 50,000 Wagner mercenaries that Putin admitted last summer that they are fully funded by Russian government. 2 years ago, in January or February 2022, he looked Macron in the eye and he said, Wagner mercenaries have nothing to do with Russian government. Last summer, after that clown coup and that march on Moscow that was short-lived, Putin goes on national television and he says exactly the opposite. There was a pattern emerging. Putin says when it's convenient to him that Russian government has nothing to do with mercenaries that kill civilians in Syria, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, Mali, Niger, Ukraine. Russia is not a Ukrainian problem. Russia is a world problem because Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Stop Russia, stop the war!
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals!
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 And the good news is that 45,000 out of 50,000 of the biggest scumbag and criminals that Russia had in their prison are now dead in Ukraine. Our army had killed them. Those 5,000 came back and the crime went up about 300 to 400%. We have cannibals, at least 2 Russian cannibals fighting here on Russian side and they are making it public. Until autumn last year, from February of 2022 until autumn last year, the Russian deal is that no matter what crime you have committed in Russia, no matter how many years you had in prison, no matter how many people you killed, how many people you raped, how many children you raped, if you join Russian army for 6 months, you get a clean slate. All those 50,000 were facing that clean slate. Only 5,000, less than 5,000, it was 4,000 something, just shy over 5,000. Only 10% got that deal. And I couldn't understand why would someone who has less than a week left in Russian prison would go and risk their life killing Ukrainians. And then it hit me. You get a clean slate. No matter what sins you have committed, no matter what crime you have committed in Russia, you get a clean slate. And the pardons were signed by Putin himself. Wagner and Prigozhin had access to all prisons in Russia. Now, because what happened to Wagner and all the head of it, including Prigozhin, they are rebranding it. It will be called African Legion. Have a look online. This is not something made up. This is a real thing. Just put 3 words in a search engine. Russia, African Legion. This is what they are doing. They are raging conflicts and stealing natural resources. Have a look. How many natural resources are in those 4 regions that Russia is trying to denazify? We have salt mines there, we have oil there. They want to denazify our natural resources because Russians are scumbag terrorist invaders. They are generational war criminals. This is an undisputed historical fact, and at least a dozen of nations can testify to that today. From Africa to Syria, from Syria to Ukraine, from Ukraine to oppressing Belarusian people after elections in 2020. This goes on and on. Flying Sudanese women to assemble drones from Iran in Alabuga. This is what is going on. Putting those Sudanese women's lives at risk. This is what Russia does. This is what Russia does. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist
Thank
state.
you for your support. Russia is a terrorist state.
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 And recently I met three famous people. I didn't speak to Zaluzhny, but I saw him. I met Usyk, and I met my friend Irko over there, who last 2 months spent gathering cars. How many was it?
300.
Over 300 cars, ULEZ cars for Ukraine. So I wanted to have a picture with this guy more than I wanted it with Usyk, you know, because what people do here is amazing. Hope he will tell you later on what he has done and what we are doing every single day. You can't imagine. We had people who came from Newcastle saying, we heard you gather here for Ukraine. We are ex-military. We want to have the same meetings like this because we understand the seismic reaction that Russian invasion of a largest European country, which Ukraine is. Forget about the EU and NATO. Ukraine geographically is a European country, largest European country. This is the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. Every single defense budget that is going up in Europe every single year since 2022 is a direct reaction of Russian scumbag terrorism. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No Russians at Olympics.
No Russians at Olympics.
No Russians at Olympics.
No Russians at Olympics.
After a Russian scumbag terrorists have killed over 487 of our athletes, 20 of which were world record holders. Just last week, they killed a heavyweight lifting champion of the world. They are killing sport. They are killing healthcare development because more money is going to defense. Countries that want to trade with Russia, if India wants to get some cheap gas, let them do what they do. After the war, they will be judged as they were. Because even like Unilever and those companies that haven't left Russia, that bar of soap can buy a handful of bullets on the taxes. That Snickers bar, every single company that haven't left Russia, they will be judged after this war. Every bullet for every taxpayer dollar that Russians paid for those products. Those products sold, bullets were bought, those Shahid Iranian suicide drones were bought. It takes about, I don't know, 400, I don't know how many, you can literally count how many soap bars it will take to buy a bullet, how many hundreds or thousands of soap bars and chocolate bars that are sold by international companies in Russia. That tax accumulates. That money that is getting paid by India or any other country for buying any natural resources, it all accumulates. Their hands will be covered in our blood. How many innocent Ukrainians must be slaughtered by these terrorists for you to understand that a democracy is fighting dictatorship. Democracy is fighting dictatorship. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 And with so many, I think it was between 70 and 80%. Thank you for your support. Between 70, I think, and 85% plus. Almost, I think it was close to more to 90% of medals in one of the last Olympics were won by Russian athletes who are closely associated with military sports club in Russia. We have football clubs like Arsenal, you know. There is, I don't know any military sport clubs in this country. Honestly, educate me if I don't know something. In Russia, there is military clubs. Wagner criminals who are now national heroes are going to schools and they're giving lectures. Well, let me tell you, I'm not gonna say his name. His name is Scumbag. Scum, and I think the last name was Bag. And that's the reason why last year on 17th of March 2023, a warrant by the was issued for his arrest was because he casually admitted in 2022 of kidnapping more than 19,500 children. I remember there was an English girl that was missing. How much resources was spent to try to find her? We are missing more than 19,500 children in Ukraine, and Putin put them in foster care after he killed their parents, because Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
Shout at home in the kitchen. Find someone that you shout all the time, please. Go away. People like that, I don't understand people like that, you know. I honestly, just heckling a war rally of a peaceful nation, which this one is our first war. This is our first war, and we want to make it the last war for Russia. That's all we want. That's all we want. And for people, stop dropping children when they're little, so they don't shout like that at civilians in the public spaces. Just shame. But parents must be proud. They raised a gentleman. I just don't know. Maybe in Russia you'll be a gentleman. This is why we gather here. This is why we gather here and we speak truth. Everything I say, I triple check with every possible source. in last quarter of a century. First time when Gazprom had announced losses was last year. 2023 was the last, was the first year since the end of 90s. Guess what happened before that? There was no Putin. There's a direct result of dictatorship. This war is historical, and last year is historical. Not just because Sweden decided that after 200 years being neutral, it can't be neutral anymore, being so close geographically to Russia, or Finland joining NATO. This year is historical because this year Putin overtaking Stalin as a dictator. One dictator in Russia, one dictator in Belarus, one dictator in North Korea. It takes up to 25 European countries and worldwide countries to help us restore minimum energy. 3 out of 12. They say the grid right now in Ukraine is at the mark 3 out of 12. This winter will be the hardest winter since the full-blown invasion, full-scale invasion that started in 2022. But this war did not start in 2022. It started on the 20th of February 2014. Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Stop Russia, stop the war.
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 Tribunal for Russian war criminals.
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 No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
No trade with Russia.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
І нашим захисникам тричі.
Слава! Слава! Слава!
And after we have a very short break for some beautiful Ukrainian music, we're gonna have Irko tell us what amazing work can people do, like Ukrainians with Brits can do, just to make this war 1 minute, 15 minutes, 1 hour, 1 day shorter. So less Ukrainians will be slaughtered by these scumbag terrorists. Thank you so much. We're gonna have some music and we're gonna continue.
Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим славним захисникам і захисницям тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Нехай повертаються живими!
Hi everyone, my name is Irko. I've been coming to this rally a lot, but not over the past 2 or 3 months. See a lot of familiar faces. I'm glad to see you all here, and also a few new faces. Equally very happy that you guys are still coming here 3 times a week. I want to thank you for continuing the resistance, continuing coming for this protest, and really it cannot be overestimated the effort you guys are putting in. So really thank you to everyone who keeps coming to these rallies 3 times a week. My hat's off to everyone, and thanks a lot for doing this for Ukraine. I want to talk a little bit about the project that I've been able to come as much as I would like. You may have heard about the ULA's scrappage scheme project. So in London there's a certain emissions regulations, and old vehicles, particularly diesel vehicles, and also even older petrol vehicles, no longer fit the ULA's standards. So basically the emission standards. So the London Transport Authorities a year and a half ago has started a ULA scrappage scheme where they're giving out grants to owners of these old vehicles in return for these drivers scrapping their vehicle. So this program has been running since January 2023, and ever since the start of the program, many Ukrainian organizations, journalists, activists have been pushing really hard for these vehicles, instead of sending them to a scrapyard, to actually send them to Ukraine, because these vehicles can do a lot of good work in Ukraine. Most of them, there's nothing wrong with the cars. They're fully operating. They all have an MOT. They all have insurance and tax. So these are working vehicles that no longer fit the latest emissions standards. So after about a year of lobbying, this scheme was approved. So since March 2024, the owners of ULA's non-compliant vehicles can apply for a grant from the government. So they apply through TfL, Transport for London. They receive a grant from the government, but instead of sending it to a scrapyard, where these vehicles get, the scrapyards make money on them, they take them down for parts, they resell them outside of the UK. But instead of financing the scrapyard operations, the drivers of these vehicles can send them to Ukraine, and they still get the same grant. So this is a program that has been running since mid-March, and as part of British Ukrainian Aid, a British charity that was established 10 years ago. Most of you will know about British Ukrainian Aid. We were selected by TfL as the partner in collecting these vehicles from the London residents and sending them to Ukraine. British Ukrainian Aid has been sending vehicles to Ukraine since 2022, maybe even before, mostly focusing on ambulances, 4x4s, pickups for medical evacuation purposes. So we already had some expertise in terms of buying vehicles and sending them to Ukraine. So that's why after consulting with the embassy, TfL selected the charity to run this project. And since March, we've been really busy implementing this project. So to date, we've collected over 300 vehicles from generous London residents, Most of them have owned their vehicles for many years, and they couldn't think about sending their working vehicle to a scrapyard. They were very happy to hear they can send their vehicle to Ukraine. And that's where we come in. We collect these vehicles, and then we receive a lot of requests from Ukraine. Of course, most of the requests are for 4x4s and vans and larger vehicles, whereas London residents drive all types of these vehicles. Some of them are vans, some of them are Jeeps, 4x4s, some of them are sedans and normal passenger cars. But we work really hard to make sure that we accept every vehicle, including motorcycles. We gather them, and then we send them to Ukraine. And then we find a good use for them in Ukraine, for humanitarian purposes, medical purposes, for evacuation purposes. While at the actual front zone, you really need a 4x4 vehicle. When you get to the roads where there's more infrastructure, you can use these two-wheel drive vehicles as well. So I'd like to have other residents of London who may have an old vehicle that is no longer ULIS compliant. You can apply for the scheme. For motorcycles, which we gladly accept, you get 1,000 government grant. For a passenger car, you get a 2,000 grant. For a van, you get 7,000 or more. Of course, there are some eligibility requirements from TfL, which means you have to have been the owner of this vehicle before the start of the scheme in January 23. But as long as you fit those criteria and you're looking at scrapping an old van or an old passenger car, please consider sending it to Ukraine. And you still get the same government grant, and those vehicles will be in Ukraine doing real work, saving lives, saving people.
ULES for Ukraine!
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 ULES for Ukraine! Thank you, Alexander. So actually the official slogan is ULES to Ukraine, but for the first time I think it's good enough. It carries the same message. So you may have heard also yesterday we had an event outside the embassy where the newly appointed ambassador, General Valery Zaluzhny, together with Alexander Usyk, the heavyweight boxing world champion, undisputed and undefeated, joined us for this ceremony where we sent out a convoy of these vehicles from London going to Ukraine. And it was great to get a lot of support. We had people arriving from different organizations, different partner organizations, charities, who have put in a lot of work in helping Ukraine. We also had some members of the parliament who joined. We had journalists. We were on the news yesterday and in several different papers. So we're trying to spread this message, and hopefully we can encourage more Londoners to send their vehicles to Ukraine. And apart from the ULIS scrappage scheme, there are also other opportunities to donate old vehicles. There were other organizations that receive old cars that people no longer need, and also ambulances. We had 2 ambulances. One was arriving from Brighton, the other one was arriving from Northern England. We load them with humanitarian aid and medical aid, and they're driven to Ukraine. Again, these are ambulances that are maybe 10, maybe 15 years old, but they're well maintained and they can still serve the people of Ukraine and save lives. So again, we'd like to encourage British people to continue the support for Ukraine, continue send vehicles and aid. And even if you don't have a vehicle, we're also doing a lot of fundraising for the transportation cost of these vehicles. Because while the local government and the TfL, they give the grants to the people for donating their vehicle or submitting their vehicle to the scheme, they don't finance the transportation of these vehicles to Ukraine. So British Ukrainian Aid, the charity, thank you, the charity involved in running the scheme needs to fundraise and finance the transportation of these vehicles to Ukraine. So again, I appeal to all the Londoners, British people, send your vehicles to Ukraine. If you don't have a vehicle that you can donate or send, consider donating to the British Ukrainian Aid charity to help finance the transportation costs to send these vehicles to Ukraine where they will save lives. Vehicles for Ukraine!
Vehicles for Ukraine!
Vehicles for Ukraine!
Vehicles for Ukraine!
More 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 cars for Ukraine!
More cars for Ukraine!
More cars for Ukraine!
More cars for Ukraine!
More vans for Ukraine!
More vans for Ukraine!
More vans for Ukraine!
More vans for Ukraine!
Ambulances for Ukraine!
Ambulances for Ukraine!
Ambulances for Ukraine!
Ambulances for Ukraine!
Lorries for Ukraine!
Lorries for Ukraine!
Lorries for Ukraine!
Lorries for Ukraine!
I just, as we were doing these chants, I remembered that we didn't just receive cars and vans, which is part of the ULA scheme. We also received a donation from a British company of a lorry, a 16-ton truck, that we loaded up with aid, and it's also on its way to Ukraine as we speak. In addition to that, Transport UK, which is, I believe it's a private company, which runs some of the London red buses. They actually donated one of the red buses to Ukraine. So that's also been a big effort from the British community. And this truck, this lorry, these vans, these cars are all on their way to Ukraine, and they will do great work in saving lives and helping support our resistance. Thank you, Britain.
Thank you, Britain!
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 And thank you to each and every one of you for coming to these rallies. And please encourage more people to come, Ukrainians, British people, all nationalities who are supporting Ukraine, supporting freedom, democracy, and are opposed against brutal invasion of an aggressor that is larger in size, has more resources, has a bigger army, has a nuclear arsenal, and just decided to invade a neighbor just for pure political ambitions. That is wrong, we all know it. So we need to stand with Ukraine, we need to keep supporting Ukraine. Thank you very much.
One more time. All last to Ukraine!
All last to Ukraine!
Oh, you will last to Ukraine!
You last to Ukraine!
You will last to Ukraine!
You last to Ukraine!
You will last to Ukraine!
You last to Ukraine!
You will last to Ukraine!
You last to Ukraine!
You will last to Ukraine!
You last to Ukraine!
Місто болить, серце болить, втомлює біль, ворог не спить, кулі летять, поки падає сніг, ворог лежить і вчить. Дай ночі без сну нам не холодно, чекає сім'я на околицях, разом ми всі переможемо, це наша рідна земля, хай буде весна, там де ми стоїмо до кінця, і нас не зламає війна, наша віра єднає серця, Україна навіки жива. Україна – це наша земля. Україна єднає серця.
Слава Україні!
Слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим захисникам тричі.
Слава! Слава! Слава!
So I think after this war will be over, and it will be over with our victory. If anyone will ask me what was the most significant person that you ever met, I think Yurko will be on top of the list, because some people don't come to these meetings because they finish work late, or because they have other plans, they are socializing somewhere, it's too negative. They don't want to look at these pictures. They got a job, they are settling in. But the worst thing that Ukrainians can do is get used to this war. Like I was going on my lunch break today here in London, and I heard the fountain there in Savoy Square. I heard people laugh, but when my friends or my family in Ukraine send me videos, and you see them on Instagram, of generators rumbling all day long because it's so hot, but the businesses still need to work even if there is no power. Those generators make colossal noise, and like Irko said, those ULEZ cars, when Britain is trying to make their country air cleaner, we are trying to make our land cleaner. The biggest pollution right now in Ukraine is scumbag Russian terrorists who are trying to kill as many civilians as possible every single day for more than 3,800 days now. They never had a day off. They will not stop. You give them 4 regions of Ukraine, they will attack Moldova. They will get Moldova, they will go further. When Putin on the 23rd of February of 2022 says to you all and to us in Ukraine that Russia has no plans to attack Ukraine, and when we go to bed, like scumbag cowards they are, like generational war criminals they are, their parents waged wars in Moldova, in Georgia, in many different countries. Their grandparents were ruling my grandparents. Their grandparents were telling my granddad Vasily, you can't get a decent work because you spent 3.5 years in a concentration camp of Nazi Germany. They said to him, you should have killed yourself. You're not a survivor, you're not a hero, you're a coward. That's what they were saying to him. To my great-granddad, their great-grandparents of those Russians who are killing Ukrainians every single day. They shot my great-granddad on my father's side just for being an Orthodox Christian priest. This January 2024, they shot a priest that was preaching in Ukrainian. Nothing changes with Russia, because Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state!
Stop Russia, stop the war.
Stop Russia, stop the war!
Stop Russia! Stop the war!
And I have an amazing news for you today. I can't tell you the name of the company. I can't tell you the name of the person. I can tell you only one thing. That person works for a company. It's a public knowledge. This bid is not a secret. BA Systems and other daughter and like smaller companies under them, and they said yes, our company gave more than 6,000 of anti-tank missiles. When I showed my notes to that person who is heavily involved in a British military development, he said, do you know how heavy an anti-tank missile, 6,000 was given to us, 90 of which was given 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, beginning of this month. He said they are 6.5 kilos, 6.5 kilos. And then I told him, what bombs are falling on us? That bombs that they are sending on us can weigh up to 16 tons. They can have a load of up to 1,000 kilograms of explosives. And yet, it takes 6.5 kilos. I think in England, they call it a stone. Yeah? 6 kilos. So a stone. David and Goliath is not only a metaphor that we can use for Usyk and Tyson Fury, but it takes 6.5 kilos of British engineering to destroy any tank. Doesn't matter if it's USSR defrosted like meat, defrosted 60s tanks or 70s tanks. 6 kilos. He said, I carried it in my arms. They are not. I was carrying 13 kilos today, a box at work. I was carrying literally 2 missiles, the same weight as 2 missiles that can destroy 2 tanks. I haven't had the time. Have a look online. How much, how many kilos, how many tons does the Russian tank weigh? And Britain does that. That aid, Britain does that. I'm gonna read it to you guys because honestly, these numbers, I can't remember them. Because these numbers, I am not a military person. New British Defense Minister John Healey announced another package of military assistance to Ukraine during his visit to Odessa. This is 7th of July this month and this year. 10 155 millimeters self-propelled guns, AS-90, 250,000 rounds of 12 millimeter caliber, 90 Brimstone anti-tank missiles. We got, before that, it was 5,910, we got another 90. Another 90 tanks will stop in Ukraine. Another 90 tanks or armed vehicles will not try to kill civilians who got mobilized to fight for their survival. 40 mine-clearing vehicles, 40 mine-cleaning vehicles. Only with the border of Belarus we put 250,000 miles because we can't trust Belarusians right now. They stand with us here, but we can't trust those who are in Belarus. They're in the army, they're on those army bases. But victory for Ukraine is a chance for Belarus to shake off dictatorship. Moldovan president, a few weeks ago, she said, victory for Ukraine and peace for Ukraine is peace for Moldova. Peace for Ukraine is peace for Moldova, it's not me saying that. Moldovan president is saying that. 61 bulldozers for construction of defense positions. 60 bulldozers to construct defensive positions. We are asking for air defense mostly for our civilians. We are asking for those F-16s to make our air less polluted from Russian scumbag terrorists. Because Russia is a terrorist state.
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 Before we continue, because we're gonna finish very soon, we try never to forget to have a minute of silence for every single person who Russian terrorists have killed and trying to kill, like those. There's numerous children. There was 600 patients in that hospital in Kiev. Many children are struggling to find a place where to have dialysis. If someone doesn't know, I didn't know that as well, but you need to learn, because Russians are educating us in how they can murder us. They are educating us more and more ways. They are trying to kill our adults on a battlefield. They are trying to kill our civilians in a block of flats. They are trying to kill cancer patients in our hospitals. This is what they are trying to do. Dialysis is something that you need so your kidneys will not fail completely. They are failing. You are dying very slowly until you get a new kidneys. But they are trying to destroy even facilities which can provide that chemotherapy for the cancer children. There's dialysis for children whose kidneys are failing. They were already dealt with a very heavy burden of very bad health. And Russians, what they do, they destroy a hospital. And they will always deny it. If they destroy a school, 3,500 schools in the Ukraine are partially damaged or fully destroyed. Shopping centers in Mariupol, they destroyed a building where our Christian pastor Eugene mom lived. This is what they do. And this is why every single war rally, we lower our flags and we honor the lives lost, the lives stolen from our peaceful nation by these scumbag terrorists. And we honor their lives lost with a minute of silence. Thank you so much. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
І нашим захисникам тричі!
Слава! Слава!